Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, Episode 8.
The electric fence is a game changer, especially with just one strand.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers produce forages for livestock. I'm Cal Hardage, your host, and on today's episode, we're talking about grazing and milking water buffalo with Jose from Rocking TT Bar. Jose tells us about water buffalo, how he manages them for milking as well as for beef, and what his plans are. But before we get Jose on here, if you're listening to our podcast, please subscribe if you haven't. Also, please share our episodes. If you go to grazinggrass.com, you can find out more about our show and our notes for each episode, as well as our links to our social media accounts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We encourage you to share our post, spread the word. And with that, let's get Jose on here. Jose, welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your operation?
Sure. I'm originally from Venezuela, where I grew up in a water buffalo ranch. I realized that that's what I wanted to do as far as a profession. So I started going to vet school in Venezuela, and halfway through it, I was able to get a scholarship that allowed me to go to Montana State University, where I studied animal and range science. And with that, I went back to Venezuela, working the family farm, and then with all the changes that happened in Venezuela, eventually I left, and my wife, being from the States, came back to Colorado to be with her side of the family, and ended up here in Colorado working in other cattle ranches. And then after doing that for about 7 years, Colorado legislation changed to allow for the growth of the water buffalo as a domestic species. So it used to be classified as an exotic species, which was a
Oh,
mistake.
okay.
It was classified the same as as the African water buffalo. So it's two different beasts. You cannot even crossbreed the Asian water buffalo with the African water buffalo. So once they corrected that mistake and classified correctly the Asian water buffalo under domestic species, that didn't happen until 2016, and that opened up the doors for me to start doing it. I never really contemplated doing it. It's just the circumstances of my life. I really missed the water buffaloes, and at that point, I had plenty of experience with cattle, specifically with Black Angus, and I really miss the water buffalo as far as how productive they are, how docile they are, and how much they thrive on the rangeland without any kind of supplements.
How do they compare to Angus cattle? I've never been around water buffalo, been around cattle a lot.
Okay, so I like to say that they're kind of like a cow, but with the brain of a horse.
Oh, okay.
So a lot smarter. Like they really pick up. For example, they pick up on their names. Like they can be in the field and they can call their names, and they know who I'm
Oh,
calling,
yes.
and they pick up on that pretty quick. So that's one of the things that happens. The other thing is that they are naturally attracted to being around people, depending on the kind of handling you have, but they want to be around people. Um, so when I go to the field and I brush and I pet and I hang around them, they all want to be around. They all want to be brushed. They all want to be
Oh,
kind of
yes.
say hello and come and lick me. So that kind of handling makes it a lot easier because it allows me to handle a herd without needing horses, without needing
Mhm.
a lot of employees. I can go in the field and basically call them, and they will come to where I am. Instead of having to push them to a place, I'll call them to a place. So that's a lot more powerful.
Oh, yes.
I like to compare it with like magnets. It's a lot more precise to attract another magnet to where you want to go than to push a magnet to where you want it to go.
Yes, it is.
Uh, so the power of attraction is more strong, is stronger than the power of repelling something. And using that as a tool just allows me to handle the animals easier, as far as taking less time to move the animals from one pasture to another, as far as loading up the animals in a trailer without using a corral, just going out in the field and being able to load them up. As far as teaching them to respect an electric fence, I use just one strand of electric fence, which is really the game changer when it comes to rotational grazing.
Oh, yes.
So, like I was explaining to you, I lease pasture, and most of these places only have a perimeter fence that in most of the time is really in a very bad shape. And a really big expense of any ranch is just maintenance of the fence. And if I go into lease property to spend a lot of time and money repairing fences and subdividing pastures, at the end, I'm really not going to make any money at the end of the grazing season. So the electric fence is a game changer, especially with just one strand. Uh,
And that
it makes it really cheap. Just using electric twine, it's just a magic tool.
oh, yes.
And I've used electric fence before, and it's you always when you compare it with barbed wire fence, it's cheaper to build to put up just because mostly because of the distance of the posts, right?
Oh,
That's
right.
one of the biggest factors.
Do you,
But it's still a big expense where the plastic insulators,
yes.
and it becomes a permanent feature where you are. So just one of the breakthroughs as far as the rotational grazing and being able to move these animals around and set up a cheap fence is being using baling twine as your insulator.
Oh, yes.
So if you tie that to the fence and actually use a little tension, pulling away from the posts, right? You can even use trees that are existing in the pasture. So
Oh,
my
yeah.
trees, most of the time, is tree or brush, grabbing a brush together, tying up with twine, becomes a post. So that way, just and when you need T-post, a T-post, and then tie the twine to it, you cut the expense by half or more.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's a good
So that's
tip.
been a big breakthrough in electric fences. I've always tried to do it, how to find a way to do it cheaper, but this being the biggest game changer.
So you talked about leased pasture. What kind of pasture are you grazing, and what kind of forages are there?
So I look for them to have at least, like I was saying, the perimeter fence and to have some a good water source.
Oh,
Then
yes.
after that is for the animals to have shade or some kind of protection from the winter and the snow. Um, the shade is important. The water buffalo, people think right away that they need a muck puddle, a lake, or a pond. And what they use that is to regulate the temperature, right? Temperature
Okay.
control in the middle of the day, in the hot time of the day. That's when they go in the mud puddle, in the river, in the water. So if you don't have that, you can have shade is an alternative, and that works just fine. So that's what I look for: is where are the animals going to eat, where are the animals going to drink, and where the animals going to regulate the temperature. And because of our conditions here in the wintertime, where they're going to hide from the snow. I mean, it's mostly
Okay.
the wind. When you get this big storm, it's the wind with the snow, not so much the snow itself. And that's something that I can build up. I build some temporary structures in the places that I keep them in the winter. As far as windbreaker, using cattle panels and plywood, and I use for the calf basically a greenhouse structure that is they call a tunnel.
Oh,
That
yes.
is a really cheap structure with a plastic, and you create basically a barn that you build up in a day, and it stays warm in there, builds up the heat in the day, and it stays dry, so it's a perfect place for the calves to sleep. So the things that I do with my herd, there's a few things that are different. Not only is that the water
Yeah.
buffaloes are unique in Colorado and different in the United States, but the rotational grazing that I do on the dairy, I don't supplement the animals. They thrive on just the native rangeland.
Oh, okay.
So it's just 100% grass-based milk production, which would be really hard to do with a Holstein or Guernsey
Oh,
or
yes.
any other cow. They just really would struggle. They would just will take a toll in their fertility, and over time they just wouldn't last. So another difference between the buffaloes and the cows is how long they live. A water buffalo will live 20 to 25 years,
Oh, okay.
and that's twice as long. So that makes a
Yes.
big difference. And another difference is reaching puberty. It takes them a little longer. So you get the first calf of a black Angus when they're 2 years old. In a water buffalo, there's some exceptions. You might get some at 2 year old, but for the most part, it's when they're 3 years old. So it
Oh,
takes them a
okay.
little longer to reach puberty.
And then do they calve every year after that, or
Yeah, every year.
yes?
Every year. And then the milk production varies, as far as volume and the month of production, and that's something to work on in this country, just because most of the operations that have existed so far has been extensive grazing, large operations.
Oh, yes.
So very few producers have been focused on really doing the work of improving the genes for milk production. And we have the tools to do that with semen from Italy. That is the one country that is allowed uh, imports of frozen semen for artificial insemination.
Oh, yes.
And that will be a tool that will help us over time build up the herd for milk production.
And do you AI your cows?
Not at the moment. This year, I have some really good bulls that are actually half Italian, and I have found over time that that's a really good way to do it is animals that are half 50-50. The way they have more of the genes that are already from this country or from this area.
Oh, yes.
You bring the genes from milk production. So I got my bulls are half Italian, and I got a few cows that are half Italian bloods. And we plan on doing some artificial insemination in the future with some selective cows to do that with. That can be also a very expensive endeavor if you're not really focused on what you're doing and what the ultimate purpose of that is. But it will be just some specific cows to produce bulls for the herd,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
replacement bulls. Yeah.
Do you see a big improvement on milk production on your half Italian cows?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a difference. There's that, and also another part that makes a really big difference is the disposition and the training, right? Obviously,
Okay.
a cow that is just not used to handling and it's just a fight, you're never gonna get the milk that she's capable of producing. So,
Right.
yeah, having the animals trained and used to this handling makes a big difference. Animals that want to come in and want to be milked, those always will produce more than the ones that you have to go and chase,
Oh,
no
yes.
matter what kind of genes they have. So
Yes.
yeah, I always like to say that attitude is the first filter as far as selecting animals.
I I've seen on your Instagram page where you're out in the pasture milking them, which is just
Yeah,
I grew up on a dairy, of course, cattle, but majority of our cows were not that tame. So, do you go out each day to where they are to milk them, or how's that work for you?
yeah. So the mobile system is having a trailer where I park the trailer in the field as part of the rotational grazing. So I go into a new pasture, I move the trailer, and the trailer becomes their base camp.
Oh,
Around
okay.
the trailers where I have the mineral blocks. So the trailer it becomes what they're familiar with it. They're naturally comfortable around it. Becomes a windbreaker with the elements too, and it's where the calves go sleep at night.
Oh, yes.
And slowly the calves get used to it. The calves want to go sleep in there, especially if the weather is
Oh,
bad.
yeah.
So having that mobile, it became a tool out of necessity, right?
Right.
But then I realized actually it is healthier for the pasture and it's a lot cheaper, on expensive way to run the operation. When you build a barn, it's a really expensive investment, and then you're tied up to it. And all the
Yes.
pastures around the barn are the ones that get used the most.
True.
The overload of manure around the barn is huge, and the parasite overload is huge, and there's no way around it.
Right.
So it's not something that I thought to solve these problems. It's just my circumstances made me come up with it. But then I realized, well, this is a lot healthier for the pasture, and it's a lot healthier for the animals as well.
Yes. I completely agree.
Because I'm building up the herd and I'm training the herd and building up the relationship with different landowners. Uh, I'm milking them in the field, but I'm not milking them in under a condition that will make for grade A milk.
Oh, okay.
The goal is in the future. I am working with the state of Colorado in a design, so in the future we can have this system, but under a milking parlor on wheels
Oh, okay.
that is certified by the state of Colorado, so we can have grade A milk under these conditions of rotational grazing out in the field, milking them.
Oh, yes. Yeah, which makes sense. Yeah. Does how much milk do you get each day from a water buffalo cow?
So I do keep the calves with the cows during the day.
Okay.
I separate at night so the calves sleep separate,
Okay.
and I in the morning when I milk, and I milk two of the teats, and the calves get two of the
Oh,
teats.
okay.
So I try not to really compromise the growth of the
Right.
calf or the learning of the calves how to be a buffalo. They spend all day with their mom learning how to be a water buffalo, and I get some of the cows will give me about half a gallon, the heifers, and a mature cow will give me 1 gallon of those two teats in the morning.
Oh, yes. Very good.
So one thing about the water buffalo milk is that it has a thicker content, so it's more dense.
Okay.
You get more pounds of cheese per gallon of milk compared to cow. So in my experience, it's about 10 liters of cow milk to make a kilo of cheese, and the water buffalo will be about 6 liters of milk to
Oh,
make
okay.
1 kilo of cheese.
Yeah.
So it's a significant
It is.
difference when it
Yes.
comes to making cheese.
Yes. And it's A2 milk?
Yeah, it is all A2, kind of like with sheep and goat.
Oh, yes.
And the big difference is how it's pure white. The milk is pure white. It doesn't have any of that yellowish color
Oh, okay.
because the beta carotene, the water buffalo transformed the beta carotene into vitamin A. So it's higher content of vitamin A because of that.
Oh, okay. Very good. And when you, so you're rotating them, how often are you moving them to a new pasture?
It depends on the size of the pasture, the size of the animal. There's so many variants. I like
Yes.
people. Oh, how many cows per acres? The variables are huge. Depends on the grass, precipitation, how many animals you have, how big the field is. So I try to make it so it's between 1 and 2 weeks in each
Oh,
field.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, some fields they might stay for a month, but I really don't stay in any field more than a month, just because the size or the size of the herd and everything else. That's the way it worked out. And I don't like to keep the milking parlor in a place longer than that either.
Right.
You start
Because,
getting more wear around it after that. So that's kind of seems to be the ideal, about 2 weeks.
oh, yes. Do you broadcast any seeds? So you plant any annuals like in our area, it's wheat or ryegrass, or are you using the forages that's already there in place?
Yeah, it's all the rangeland. It's all rangeland and helping improve the rangeland.
Oh, yes.
Trying to graze it also with the right time. Some pastures that might have problems with weeds, right?
Yes.
Like thistles is one of the problems around here.
Oh, okay.
Thistles and knapweed. So trying to hit those pastures right when the flower is at its prime. The water buffaloes really like to eat them. So use them also as a tool over time to improve the pasture.
So they'll eat the thistle?
They are pretty good about leaving the seed pods. So
Oh,
after grazing, if you don't overgraze and they just graze the leaves and you leave the seed pods, that also helps over time improve the pasture.
oh, okay.
So no, I don't bring any seeds. It's just help improve what's
Right.
existing. Then, as a part of doing that, is also parking the milking parlor in those areas of the pastures that are marginal,
Oh,
that
okay.
need that a little extra help with a little more manure, right? That trampoline is not really going to hurt the grass. It's just like either where there's weeds or where there's more rocky, and
Yes.
the grass is just like cheat grass. Those will be the places that is more ideal to go and park the milking parlor.
Oh,
See?
very good. And you also process and sell water buffalo meat?
The meat, yes. I sell the beef at the farmers market and some of the
Oh,
local
yes.
restaurants. So the beef is lean, is lower in cholesterol. It doesn't
Okay.
have as much of that intermuscular fat. So in a way, it's like the opposite of wagyu,
Oh,
right?
okay.
That has all
Right.
that
Yes.
all that fat. So it's kind of a healthier beef. It's not as tender because the intermuscular fat is what gives that extra tenderness.
Right.
So it's selecting animals that are a little younger, just between a year and a half to butcher
Okay.
to get a little more tenderness. But the flavor is real sweet. It has the gamey flavor because of the grass fed,
Yes.
and it tastes kind of between bison and elk.
Oh, okay.
So in Colorado, because people have that culture of the hunting elk and people are familiar with the elk,
Yes.
they understand that and they look for it because of it. And Yeah, it's appreciated because of that similarity to the elk, at least around here.
Oh, yes. Well, I find the water buffalo very fascinating, and the pictures you posted that I've seen on Facebook and Instagram are also pretty, and the animals look great, and they are so tame, which just surprises me so much how calm they are because you're just completely all over them, and they're fine with it.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, and they have to be, it's part of the thing. I have a 1.5 year old that I had to be feel comfortable
Oh,
with him
yes,
walking around the cows, that
you
not be
do.
worried about him. That's
Right.
important. The same thing with me, with any employee, you just have to, otherwise it becomes a liability. You have an animal that you don't trust and it can hurt an employee, and then instead of having an animal that is an asset, you really have is a liability in your
Oh,
hands.
right. Yes. Now, in your experience with water buffalo, are they all pretty calm, or do you get some that's pretty nervous too? You've really got to manage for that docileness.
Yeah, no, it's a matter of handling.
Yes.
Definitely, handle makes a big role. They do have some of the natural attitude and disposition, right?
Right.
But the way they raise makes a huge difference. It's kind of like a wild Mustang,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Yeah, horses can be nice and beautiful, but go get a wild Mustang, you're gonna get kicked really hard
True. True.
trying to train.
Yes.
So it's very similar. And that was the biggest challenge here because most of the animals come from extensive grazing, large herds,
Okay.
right? Nobody's really doing it for milk
Right.
production. I couldn't really go to another producer and be like, hey, I would like to buy some heifers that I, you know, train, halter broke. No, that does not exist or did not
Oh,
exist
yes.
prior to the time I started doing this. The animals have that disposition, and it's why they've been used in Asia for doing work, from plowing the rice fields to, pull a wagon, uh, being ridden. They have that disposition, they're really good at it, but yeah, the handling and the training makes a big difference. So I started really small, on one hand, to really make sure that they were going to perform in Colorado accordingly, which I'll get to. And the other reason is
Oh,
so I could
yes.
actually train them for these kinds of handling. After I had enough animals, I went ahead and I bought some adults and I introduced them to the herd once the herd was already trained to this kind of handling. Yeah, and at the beginning, some animals
Okay.
caught up with it. Maybe in a week, they came around and they wanted to be brushed and pet and be around me. Some other ones took me months to have them come around,
Oh,
and they
yes.
did. But it takes work with some of them that come from places that they're not used to people. Now, once they've been around you and they've been around people and the heart are broke, they're extremely easy to handle. But yeah, it takes a little bit of work of training them.
Right.
And once they come from a herd that is being trained like this, everything gets easier.
Oh, yeah.
So as far as
Yeah,
a,
for
as
sure.
a performing for this weather, uh, I knew that there had been an experiment they did in Montana in the year 2001, where they took 5 bulls and had them out there exposed to the elements to see how they did.
Oh, yes.
And they made it through the winter just being fed hay, but no shelter, no nothing, just 5 bulls together, which is important for them to be a group because they really stay closer together than cows. Cows
Oh,
stay as a
okay.
group, the buffaloes do too, but even tighter together. They graze closer together, they sleep even closer together.
Oh,
And
yeah.
in the winter, that makes a difference. They sleep in a bundle,
Oh,
basically.
okay.
So that helps them out. So I knew they could perform in the winter, and I knew they could perform at high altitude. In Venezuela, they went from being in the lowlands and expanding everywhere to making it all the way to the Andes. And I seen them there in a place that was high altitude and cold, and I was impressed at the moment seeing, wow, how
Oh,
the
yes.
buffaloes can really be just everywhere. And they really can. They have my experience with Black Angus is frequent. Anyone that has cattle has to deal with foot rot, pink eye, bloating, diarrhea. None of those have been an issue with buffaloes.
Oh,
None
yes.
of it.
Yeah.
I have had zero health issues with them so far.
So, are you doing any vaccination or worming? You're just
Yeah, deworming.
yes.
Yeah, deworming is a problem.
Oh, okay.
Internal and what impressed me the most actually was external parasite ticks, particularly a lot of ticks in the spring.
Oh, yes.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, and in the condition that I have, they just grazing, and in that time of year, they go through the sagebrush and everywhere else, they get covered to the point that they enjoy and they just stand there with their legs wide open to get their ticks picked. The time of year you just go and pick them off. I
Oh,
do spray them
yes.
for it, but still, they just love having a tick check.
They, yeah, they like the
Yeah, it's
attention.
pretty funny actually. That time of year is hilarious.
Oh, yes. Imagine it is. Well, Jose, we have on our podcast our famous 4 questions. And they're questions we ask
Okay.
every guest. So I'm going to go through them with you. What's your favorite grazing grass related book or resource? And since we're talking a lot about water buffalo, maybe something out there about that.
Not a particular book comes to mind. I would say the holistic management from Savory
Yes,
would be an important one, right?
right.
It has a lot of those principles, and it's been around for a while. I think that would be an appropriate book. It applies to all species.
Yes, yes. Very good selection there. What tool could you not live without on your farm?
A machete.
A machete. That's not an
Yeah,
answer we've had before.
yeah, a machete for sure. It's a very South American thing, but that's
Oh,
our tool
yes.
of choice. Yeah,
Very good.
I actually have two in my truck under my seat at all
Oh,
times.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very good. And what would you tell someone just getting started?
get some hands-on experience first.
Yes.
Make sure you have that hands-on experience. Yeah, from somebody that you admire, that that knows, or that is around your area, that is an old timer perhaps, or yeah, just get some experience. The younger you can get your experience, the better,
Yes.
and the more diverse the experience, the best. But yeah, hands-on. If you Yeah, that's what I learned the most. Although I had the privilege and the opportunity of going to college, it really was all the little jobs that I did when I was younger, learning from all kinds of people, all different things. And it's really opening up your mind of all the different ways that it can be done, that you're going to tap into when you need to.
Oh, yes. Yes. I was listening to a podcast earlier and they said when you're young, you say yes to everything so you get that experience. As you
Yeah,
age,
for
you can
sure.
start saying no to more things. You can hone in on what your skills are. And lastly, where can others find out more about you?
So our Instagram page, you can reach us through there, text us, see some pictures and videos. Facebook and Instagram. So it's the Rocking Titty Bar, and that's from the brand, right? There's a way to
Right.
read cattle brands, right?
Yes.
So it's the Rocker, the double T, and the bar,
Yes.
Rocking Titty Bar. So obviously has that name play with it, right? As
Right.
far as being the milk production, right? That's what we produce at the Rocking Titty Bar.
Yes. Very good. That's good.
So
Well, thank you, Jose. We appreciate you being on here.
you're welcome. I hope people can expand a little bit their toolkit with these ideas of the electric fence. Just play with it. I think that's really the biggest breakthrough I've had in the last couple of years as far as seeing things and just coming up with things along the way by necessity. Yeah, electric fence with baling twine.
Very good. Thank you for listening to the Grazing Grass podcast, helping grass farmers produce forages for livestock. Be sure and share this episode with someone. And until next time, keep grazing.